In the high-stakes world of New York's financial elite, silence was the most expensive commodity, and Silas Sterling owned all of it. The billionaire CEO of Sterling Dynamics was known not just for his ruthless acquisitions, but for his terrifying standards. He had fired executive assistants for using the wrong font size and banned waiters from his presence for breathing too loudly. He was a man of ice and precision, a king who tolerated no errors. So, when a young, invisible waitress at the city's most exclusive private club dared to snatch a $5,000 glass of scotch right out of his hand, the entire room froze. The staff braced for her destruction. They expected him to ruin her. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and said 4 words that would change the course of his empire and reveal a secret that would shock the world. The Obsidian was not a place you could simply walk into. You didn't make a reservation. You were invited, and only if your net worth had 9 zeros or your bloodline could be traced back to the Mayflower. Hidden behind an unmarked heavy iron door on a quiet street in Tribeca, it was the sanctuary for the masters of the universe. Inside, the air smelled of aged mahogany, Italian leather, and the crisp scent of old money. For the staff, however, the Obsidian was a battlefield, and tonight the war drums were beating. "He's 5 minutes out," Henri, the club's maitre d', hissed into his earpiece. His face, usually a mask of French composure, was slick with sweat. He turned to the line of servers standing at attention against the velvet wall. "Listen to me. Mr. Sterling had a bad quarter. The merger with Kincaid failed. He is in a mood. Do not look him in the eye. Do not offer him the specials. Do not speak unless he asks you a direct question. Is that clear?" A ripple of nervous nods went down the line. They knew the stories. Silas Sterling, the 34-year-old CEO of Sterling Dynamics, treated dining like a military inspection. Last month, he had purchased the building housing a Michelin-star restaurant just to fire the chef who had overcooked his scallop. "Cassidy," Henry snapped, focusing on a young woman at the end of the line, "you're on water duty. Do not mess this up. Still water. Room temperature, no ice. If the glass condenses, you replace it immediately." Cassidy Miller adjusted her apron. She was 26, with messy chestnut hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that seemed too tired for her age. She had only been working at the Obsidian for 3 months, a ghost in the machine. She kept her head down, did her work, and collected her tips in cash. "Understood, Henri," Cass said, her voice low and steady. Unlike the others, whose hands were trembling, Cass stood perfectly still. The heavy doors swung open. The room didn't go silent. It went dead. Silas Sterling walked in. He was a striking man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than Cassidy's entire year of rent. His face was angular, handsome in a brutal, statuesque way, with eyes the color of cold steel. He didn't look around the room. He walked straight to his usual table in the far corner. Table 9, the one with the view of the private garden and the most isolation from the other patrons. Henri rushed forward, bowing slightly. "Mr. Sterling, welcome back. We have prepared—" Silas didn't stop walking. He didn't even look at Henri. He simply held up a hand, silencing the man instantly. He reached the table, sat down, and placed his phone face down on the white tablecloth. "Whiskey?" Silas said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough with exhaustion. "The Macallan 52, neat, and bring me the quarterly reports on the table tablet. I don't want to be disturbed." "Of course, sir." "Immediately," Henry squeaked. He signaled frantically to the sommelier and then to Cassidy. Cassidy moved toward the table, a crystal pitcher of room-temperature water in her hand. She approached from his left, her movements silent. She poured the water, filling the glass to exactly 1 inch below the rim. His preference. Silas was staring at the tablet screen, his brow furrowed. He was reading a dense financial document, his fingers drumming an irritated rhythm on the table. Cassidy placed the water down. She noticed something the others hadn't. Silas wasn't just angry, he was in pain. He was massaging his left temple, a subtle, involuntary tic he likely didn't know he had. The lighting at table 9 was slightly dimmer than the rest of the room, causing him to squint at the high-contrast screen of the tablet. She wanted to reach over and turn up the brightness on the table lamp, but she knew the rules. Invisible. "Your water, sir," she whispered, barely audible. Silas didn't acknowledge her. He just waved his hand in a dismissal gesture without looking up. Cassidy stepped back into the shadows. The sommelier, a nervous man named Arthur, arrived with the bottle of Macallan 52. This was a liquid gold, costing thousands of dollars a pour. Arthur's hands shook slightly as he uncorked the bottle. "The 1952, Mr. Sterling," Arthur announced, trying to sound confident. "An exquisite choice." Silas didn't look up. "Pour." Arthur poured the amber liquid into the crystal tumbler. He placed it near Silas's hand. Silas finally looked away from the screen. He reached for the glass, his eyes dark with frustration. He needed this drink. The Kincaid deal had collapsed because of a leak in his own board. He was surrounded by traitors and incompetents. He lifted the glass to his lips, anticipating the burn that would numb the headache pounding behind his eyes. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the darkness. It was a small, pale hand. It grabbed the heavy crystal glass right out of Silas Sterling's grip, just as it touched his lip. The clink of the glass being set forcefully back onto the table echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Silas froze. His hand was still raised in the air, empty. Slowly, terrifyingly, he turned his head. Cassidy Miller was standing there. Her hand was on the base of the glass, sliding it away from him. The entire dining room had stopped eating. Henry, watching from the station, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. A waitress had just physically touched Silas Sterling. A waitress had just denied him his drink. Silas lowered his hand. He looked at Cassidy, his eyes narrowing into slits. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What?" Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you think you are doing?" Henry was running over, already stammering apologies. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry. She is new, she is—" "Cassidy, get back to the kitchen. You're fired. Get out." "No," Silas said. He didn't look at Henry. He kept his eyes locked on Cassidy. "I want to hear her answer. She just took a drink from my hand. I want to know why she thinks she should survive the next 5 minutes." Cassidy didn't flinch. She didn't look at Henry. She looked directly into Silas's steel-grey eyes. "I saved you the embarrassment, Mr. Sterling," Cassidy said. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was calm. "Matter of fact." Silas blinked. "Excuse me." "The glass," Cassidy gestured to the tumbler. "Smell it." "I don't need to smell it. It's a Macallan 52. It's perfect." "It was a Macallan 52, Cassidy corrected him. But the glass wasn't polished with the linen cloth. It was polished with a synthetic fiber rag that had residual lemon detergent on it. If you had taken a sip, you wouldn't have tasted 50 years of oak and peat. You would have tasted dish soap and citrus. You would have spit it out, caused a scene, and ruined your suit." She paused, then added, "And for a man who just lost the Kincaid merger because of overlooked details, I assumed you wouldn't want another error on your table tonight." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Henry gasped. She had just insulted him, the club, and mentioned a private business failure that hadn't even hit the news yet. Silas stared at her. His face was unreadable. He slowly reached out and picked up the glass. He brought it to his nose and inhaled deeply. He paused. He sniffed again. Silas Sterling set the glass down. He looked at the sommelier, Arthur, who was now trembling visibly. "She's right," Silas said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "It smells like floor cleaner." Arthur turned pale. "Sir, I assure you—" "Get it out of my sight," Silas snapped, "and bring me a fresh bottle, a new glass. And if this woman isn't the one pouring it, don't bother coming back." Arthur scrambled away. Henry stood there, mouth open, looking between Silas and Cassidy. "Leave us," Silas commanded Henry. Henry bowed and retreated, shooting a confused, terrified look at Cassidy. Now they were alone. The billionaire and the waitress. "You have a sharp nose," Silas said, leaning back in his chair. He was studying her now, really looking at her for the first time. He saw the frayed collar of her uniform, the weary lines around her eyes, and the way she held herself, not like a servant, but like an equal, waiting for a turn to speak. "And big ears," he added. "How do you know about Kincaid?" Cassidy clasped her hands behind her back. "I read lips, Mr. Sterling. You were on a video call in the lobby last week. You were yelling at your CFO about the due diligence reports." Silas let out a short, incredulous huff of air. It might have been a laugh. You're a spy. I'm a waitress, Cassidy said. In a room full of people who think I'm furniture, I hear a lot of things. What's your name? Cassidy. Well, Cassidy, Silas said, picking up the tablet again, you saved me from drinking soap. Don't let it go to your head. I wouldn't dream of it, sir. Will there be anything else? Silas looked at the headache-inducing screen, then back at her. You said overlooked details. You think I missed something with Kincaid? It was a trap. Cassidy knew it. He was baiting her, testing her boundaries. A waitress shouldn't have an opinion on a billion-dollar merger. But Cassidy Miller was tired. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be invisible, and tired of watching arrogant men make mistakes she could fix in her sleep. The Kincaid family trusts land assets more than IP, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper so only he could hear. You offered them stock options. You should have offered them the deed to the seaport logistics hub you acquired last year. They don't want money, Mr. Sterling. They want legacy. Silas went perfectly still. His eyes widened slightly. It was the first crack in his armor she had ever seen. That is proprietary information, he murmured. The seaport hub is a shell asset. It's a legacy asset, she corrected, and it's the only key that fits that lock. She poured a fresh glass of water, placing it perfectly on his coaster. Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Sterling. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the dining room, leaving one of the most powerful men in the world staring at her back, completely and utterly bewildered. The next day, the atmosphere at the Obsidian was even more tense, but for a different reason. The staff wasn't just afraid of Silas Sterling, they were terrified of Cassidy Miller. What did you say to him? Henry cornered her in the prep kitchen before the shift started. He was wringing his hands. He called the owner this morning, personally. Cassidy felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Here it comes, she thought. He's going to have me fired. I stepped too far. She needed this job. The tips were the only thing paying for her mother's care facility upstate. I just apologized for the glass, Henri. He requested you, Henri said, his eyes wide. He specifically requested that no one else is allowed to approach table 9 tonight. Only you. Cassidy let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Okay. Okay? Henry sputtered. Cassidy, this man eats people for sport. If you spill a drop of soup on him, we are all doomed. Be careful. When Silas arrived that evening, he looked different. The exhaustion was still there, etched into the dark circles under his eyes, but there was a manic energy to him. He was wearing a navy suit tonight, sharper, more aggressive. He sat at table 9. He didn't look at his phone, he didn't look at his tablet. He folded his hands on the table and waited. Cassidy approached. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Sparkling or still? Sit down, Silas said. Cassidy paused, the water pitcher hovering in her hand. Sir, I can't. It's against protocol. I could lose my job. I bought the club, Silas said calmly. Cassidy blinked. I beg your pardon? I bought the Obsidian this morning. The paperwork went through at 4 p.m. Henry is now my employee. You are my employee, and I am telling my employee to sit down. He kicked the chair opposite him out with his foot. Cassidy looked around. The other diners were pretending not to notice, but every ear in the room was strained toward table 9. Slowly, she set the pitcher down and sat in the velvet chair. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Who are you? Silas asked, leaning forward. I told you, I'm Cassidy. I ran a background check on Cassidy Miller, Silas said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. High school diploma from Ohio. Some community college credits. Worked in a diner in Jersey, then a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Clean record, boring record. He slid the paper across the table, but Cassidy Miller doesn't know about the amortization of subsidiary assets. Cassidy Miller doesn't understand the psychological profile of the Kincaid family. Silas tapped the table with his index finger. So I'll ask again. Who are you? Cassidy's heart hammered against her ribs. She had built this identity carefully. I read a lot, Mr. Sterling. The Financial Times is available at the library. Don't lie to me, Silas snapped, his voice rising just enough to make a nearby couple jump. I tried your strategy. I called the Kincaid patriarch this morning. I offered the seaport deed. Cassidy waited. And? He signed. The deal is done. You made me $400 million in a 10-minute phone call. Silas stared at her, his expression a mix of fascination and suspicion. You are not a waitress. I serve food, I clean tables, I take tips, Cassidy said, her voice hard. That makes me a waitress. If you're happy with the advice, leave a big tip. But don't interrogate me. She stood up to leave. I need an assistant, Silas blurted out. It was a command, not a request. Cassidy stopped. You have assistants. You fire them weekly. They are idiots. They are terrified of me. You… Silas looked at her hands, rough from washing dishes. You aren't scared of me. I need someone who can see what I miss. I'll pay you triple whatever you make here. No, Cassidy said instantly. Silas looked shocked. No? I'm offering you a life out of this servitude. I'm offering you 6 figures. I can't work for you, Mr. Sterling. Why? Because you are a tyrant, Cassidy said, loud enough for Henri to hear from the service station. You treat people like code to be debugged. You think money buys loyalty. It doesn't. It just rents silence. I like my quiet life. I like going home and not thinking about stock prices. Everyone has a price, Silas said, his eyes cold again. Name yours. You can't afford me, she whispered. She turned and walked back to the kitchen, leaving Silas Sterling sitting alone at his table, the new owner of a club he didn't want, rejected by a waitress he couldn't understand. But Silas was a man who didn't take no for an answer. As he watched the kitchen doors swing shut, he pulled out his phone. Get me P.I. Vance, he said into the phone, his eyes still fixed on the door. I want a deep dive, not the digital stuff. I want to know where she goes, who she sees, and where she really came from. Dig until you hit bedrock. For the next 2 weeks, Silas Sterling became a fixture at the Obsidian. He didn't come for the food. He came to torment Cassidy Miller. He would sit at table 9 and conduct high-level business meetings, deliberately speaking loudly enough for her to hear. He would make obvious errors in his logic, pausing, waiting for her to correct him. It was a game, a dangerous, flirtatious, intellectual game. Cassidy tried to resist. She really did, but when he was discussing the acquisition of a renewable energy firm and was about to over-leverage the debt, she couldn't help herself. She was clearing his appetizer plates. The debt-to-equity ratio is too high, she muttered. If the regulatory credits expire in 2026, you'll be underwater. Silas hid a smile behind his napkin. So you suggest a stock swap instead? Obviously, she retorted. This went on night after night. The staff watched in bewilderment. The terrifying Silas Sterling was softening. He wasn't yelling at the chefs. He wasn't throwing phones. He was spending 3 hours a night drinking water and debating market trends with a waitress. But outside the club, the net was tightening. One rainy Tuesday, Cassidy finished her shift at 2 a.m. She walked out the back alley exit, pulling her coat tight against the chill. She headed toward the subway, her body aching. A black SUV pulled up alongside her. The window rolled down. It was Silas. Get in, he said. It's pouring. I take the train, Cassidy said. Keep walking. The train is delayed, flooding on the tracks. Come on, Cassidy. I'm not going to kidnap you. I just want to talk. Cassidy hesitated. The rain was freezing. She sighed and opened the door, sliding into the warm leather interior. Where to? Silas asked. Queens, Astoria. He nodded to his driver. As the car glided through the city, the silence between them was heavy. Why are you hiding? Silas asked softly. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the city lights blur by. I see the way your mind works. You have an MBA, don't you? Maybe a JD. You analyze risk faster than my algorithms. Why are you wiping tables? Cassidy looked out the window. Because tables are simple, Silas. If a table is dirty, you wipe it. It's clean. There's no grey area, no moral compromise. You do the job, you go home. And in your old life, there was moral compromise. She stiffened. I didn't say I had an old life. You didn't have to. Silas turned to her. The streetlights illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He looked less like a shark and more like a man who was lonely at the top of the world. I'm tired, Cassidy. Everyone around me says yes. They lie to me to keep their paychecks. You are the only person who tells me the truth. I don't just want an assistant. I need a partner, a thinking partner. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Cassidy recoiled. "I am not that kind of girl." Silas laughed, a genuine rusty sound. "It's not a ring, you narcissist. Open it." She opened the box. Inside was a black key card. "That's an all-access pass to Sterling Dynamics," Silas said. "Floor 50, the executive suite. The office next to mine is empty. It has a view of the Hudson. I had them put a desk in there today, and a coffee machine that doesn't use pods. Silas, just come in. Tomorrow, look at the numbers for the Helios project. If you think it's boring, if you think I'm a tyrant, you can walk out and I will never bother you again. I'll even sell the club back to the original owners." Cassidy looked at the key card. It was black, sleek, and terrifying. It represented everything she had run away from. But looking at Silas, seeing the desperation he tried to hide behind his arrogance, she felt a familiar pull. The pull of the game, the thrill of the deal. "One day," she said, "I'll give you one day." Silas smiled. It was a real smile transforming his face. "One day is all I need." But neither of them knew that they were being watched. Across the street from Cassidy's apartment building, a man in a grey sedan lowered a camera with a telephoto lens. He dialed a number. "I found her," the man said. "She's in New York. And you're not going to believe who she's with. She's with Silas Sterling." On the other end of the line, a voice cold as the grave replied, "Send me the photos. It's time for a family reunion." The elevator ride to the 50th floor of Sterling Dynamics took exactly 45 seconds. For Cassidy Miller, it felt like a lifetime. She was wearing her best outfit, a simple black blazer she had bought from a thrift store and a pair of trousers that she had tailored herself. It was professional, but compared to the Italian wool and silk she knew she would see upstairs, it was armor made of cardboard. When the doors slid open, she wasn't greeted by a receptionist. She was greeted by chaos. The executive floor was a hive of panicked activity. Analysts were running with tablets, phones were ringing off the hook, and shouting could be heard from the main conference room. Silas Sterling was standing in the middle of the hallway, barking orders at a terrified team of junior executives. "I don't care what the projections say," Silas roared. "If the lithium supply chain isn't secured by noon, the Helios project is dead in the water. Get me the Minister of Mining in Chile, now." He spun around and saw Cassidy. For a second, the storm on his face cleared. He looked her up and down, noting the cheap blazer, but he didn't sneer. He nodded. "You came," he said. "You gave me a key card," Cassidy replied, clutching her bag tight. "What's happening?" "Disaster," Silas said, gesturing for her to follow him. He walked fast, his long legs eating up the distance. "The board is meeting in 10 minutes. They want to kill the Helios project. They think renewable energy is a money pit. They want to pivot back to heavy manufacturing. And you? I think Helios is the future. If we drop it, Sterling Dynamics becomes a dinosaur. We'll be extinct in 10 years. He stopped at a heavy oak door. "I need you in there." "Silas, I'm a waitress," Cassidy whispered frantically. "I can't go into a board meeting. I don't have clearance. I don't have a title." "You have a brain," Silas said. "That's more than anyone else in that room." He pushed the doors open. The boardroom was vast. A long mahogany table dominated the space, seated around which were 12 men and women who looked like they had been carved out of granite. They were the old guard, the people who had served Silas's father. At the head of the table, opposite Silas's empty chair, sat Preston Vane. Preston Vane was 60, silver-haired, and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was Silas's godfather and his greatest enemy. He held a significant chunk of voting shares and had been trying to oust Silas for 3 years. "Ah, Silas," Preston said, his voice smooth like oil. "We were just discussing your resignation." Silas walked to the head of the table. He didn't sit. He stood, looming over them. "I'm not going anywhere, Preston. And neither is Helios." "The numbers don't lie," Preston said, tapping a thick stack of files. "The ROI is negative for the first 5 years. The shareholders won't tolerate it. We need to liquidate the division." Silas ground his teeth. He knew Preston was manipulating the data, but he couldn't prove it in real time. He looked at Cassidy, who was standing awkwardly by the door. "Sit," Silas commanded, pointing to the chair next to him. The room went silent. Preston Vane looked at Cassidy, his lip curling in disgust. "And who?" Preston asked. "Is this? Did you bring your housekeeper, Silas?" Laughter rippled through the room. Cassidy felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to run. She wanted to go back to the Obsidian, where the only thing she had to worry about was water glasses. But then she looked at Silas. He looked cornered. He was fighting a war alone. Something in Cassidy snapped. It was the same instinct that made her snatch the whiskey glass. She hated bullies. She walked to the table. She didn't sit. She reached over and grabbed the file in front of Preston Vane. "Hey," Preston barked, "that is confidential." Cassidy flipped the file open. Her eyes scanned the spreadsheets. She read fast, a skill she had honed reading legal briefs in a life she had tried to forget. "You're calculating the overhead based on domestic production costs," Cassidy said, her voice clear and cutting. Preston scoffed. So, Cassidy continued, flipping a page, "Silas secured a trade agreement with Vietnam last month. It lowers production costs by 40%. You didn't factor that in." She looked up, meeting Preston's eyes. "And here, on page 40, you've listed the R&D grant money as a liability instead of an asset. That's not an accounting error, Mr. Vane. That's fraud." The silence in the room was absolute. Silas snatched the file from Cassidy's hand. He looked at the line she pointed to. His eyes widened. "She's right," Silas said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You cooked the books, Preston. You made the project look like a failure to tank the stock price so you could buy more shares cheap." Silas threw the file onto the table. It slid down the polished wood and hit Preston in the chest. "This meeting is adjourned," Silas declared. "And Preston, if you ever try to sabotage my company again, I will have the SEC in here so fast your head will spin." The board members looked at Preston with shock and suspicion. One by one, they closed their folders and stood up. The coup had failed. Preston Vane stood up slowly. He gathered his things. He stopped in front of Cassidy. "You have made a very powerful enemy, young lady," he hissed. "I've handled worse customers," Cassidy replied coolly. When the room cleared, Silas collapsed into his chair. He let out a long, ragged breath. Then he looked at Cassidy. "Fraud," he muttered. "He was committing fraud right under my nose." "He was banking on you being too emotional to check the math," Cassidy said, finally sitting down. Her legs were shaking. Silas spun his chair to face her. "You are hired, officially, Director of Strategy. I don't care what you want. I will pay you $500,000 a year, and I'll give you a signing bonus." Cassidy looked at him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by fear. She had just exposed herself. She had shown her hand. "Silas, I can't be director. People will ask questions. They'll dig into my past." "Let them dig," Silas said. He reached out and for the second time touched her hand. This time he didn't pull away. "Whatever is in your past, we can handle it. We just took down Preston Vane. We're invincible." Cassidy looked into his eyes and wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she could have this life. "Okay," she whispered, "but no press releases, no photos. I stay in the background." "Done," Silas said. He stood up. "Now, I'm starving. Do you know where to get a burger around here?" "I know a place," Cassidy smiled, "but you're paying." As they left the office, laughing, Cassidy felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she had escaped the darkness. Maybe she was safe. She was wrong. A week later, Cassidy stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in a penthouse suite at the Pierre Hotel. Silas had insisted she attend the Sterling Foundation annual gala. "It's non-negotiable," he had said. "We need to secure the investors for Helios. You know the numbers better than I do. I need you by my side." She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that hugged her frame and pulled at her feet. It was backless, elegant, and understatedly expensive. Her hair, usually in a messy bun, was cascaded in loose waves down her shoulders. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. "You look—" Silas's voice trailed off as he walked into the room. He was wearing a tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome. He stopped, staring at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You look incredible, Cassidy." "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," she muttered, smoothing the silk. "You belong here," Silas said softly. He walked over and fastened a diamond necklace around her neck. Tonight you aren't the waitress, you aren't the consultant. You're the woman who saved my company. They took the limousine to the Met Museum where the gala was being held. The paparazzi were a wall of flashing lights. Cassidy kept her head down, using Silas's broad frame to shield herself, adhering to her rule. No photos. Inside, the Temple of Dendur was transformed into a glittering ballroom. Waiters moved with trays of champagne, waiters who reminded Cassidy of herself just a week ago. The night was a blur of introductions. Cassidy charmed senators, tech moguls, and philanthropists. She spoke fluent French to the ambassador and discussed semiconductor logistics with the CEO of a Japanese tech giant. Silas watched her with awe. He was falling. Hard. Around midnight, Silas pulled her onto the balcony overlooking Central Park. The air was crisp. "My father built this company," Silas said, looking at the skyline. "But he was a cold man. He taught me that trust was a weakness. He died alone in a hospital room checking stock prices." He turned to Cassidy. "I didn't want to end up like him, but I was on that path. Until you stole my whiskey." He stepped closer. The noise of the party faded. "Cassidy, I don't know who you were before, and I don't care. I just know who you are now." He leaned in. Cassidy's heart hammered. She wanted this. She wanted him. "Silas," she breathed. Just as their lips were about to touch, a voice cut through the air like a jagged knife. "Victoria, is that you?" Cassidy froze. Her blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It was the voice of her nightmares. She pulled away from Silas and turned around. Standing in the doorway of the balcony was a man in a tuxedo. He was older, with a mane of white hair and a face that had once been handsome but was now hardened by years of bitterness and greed. Harrison Blackwood, the corporate butcher, the man who had pioneered the hostile takeover in the 90s, destroyed thousands of pensions, and been indicted for massive securities fraud before fleeing the country on a technicality. He was also Cassidy's father. Silas frowned. "Who is this? And why did he call you Victoria?" Harrison stepped into the light, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Hello, Silas. You look just like your father, poor Edward. He never did have the stomach for the game." "Security," Silas called out, stepping in front of Cassidy protectively. "Get this man out of here." "I wouldn't do that," Harrison chuckled. "I'm family." He looked at Cassidy. "Tell him, Victoria. Tell him who you really are." Cassidy was trembling. She couldn't speak. Her throat was constricted with terror. "Cassidy?" Silas asked, looking back at her. "Do you know this man?" "She knows me," Harrison said, walking closer. "She's my daughter, Victoria Blackwood, the heiress to the Blackwood Empire." Silas went still. He looked at Harrison, then at Cassidy. "Blackwood?" Silas repeated, the name tasting like ash. "Harrison Blackwood is the man who bankrupted my father's first company. He drove my grandfather to suicide." Silas turned to Cassidy, his eyes searching hers for a denial. "Tell me he's lying. Tell me you aren't a Blackwood." Cassidy looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Silas, please, let me explain." "It's true," Silas whispered. The warmth left his eyes, replaced by the cold steel she had seen that first night at the Obsidian. "You're his daughter." "And a chip off the old block," Harrison laughed. "She's been infiltrating your company, hasn't she? Feeding you bad data, or maybe just gaining your trust so she could twist the knife?" "No," Cassidy screamed. "Silas, that's not true. I ran away from him. I changed my name to get away from his money, from his crimes. I hate him." "Is that why you were in my boardroom?" Silas asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Is that why you manipulated Vane? Was it all a setup? A long con to help Daddy finish what he started 20 years ago?" "Silas, look at me," Cassidy pleaded, reaching for his arm. "I saved Helios. I saved you." Silas pulled his arm away as if she had burned him. "You lied to me, every single day. You sat in my office, ate dinner with me, let me trust you, and you were a Blackwood the whole time." "I am not a Blackwood," she cried. "I am Cassidy." Harrison checked his watch. "Actually, darling, the news just broke. My team sent the tip to the Wall Street Journal an hour ago. Sterling CEO in bed with fugitive tycoon's daughter. The market opens in 6 hours. Sterling Dynamics stock is going to freefall." Harrison looked at Silas. If you want to save your company, Silas, you'll sell it to my private equity firm. Pennies on the dollar. Or go down with the ship. Silas looked at Cassidy. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. It broke her heart more than any poverty or hardship ever had. "Get out," Silas said. "Silas, get out," he roared, the sound echoing off the stone walls of the museum. "You are fired. If I see you near my company or me again, I will have you arrested for corporate espionage." Cassidy sobbed. She looked at her father, who was smiling triumphantly. She looked at Silas, the man she loved, who now looked at her like she was a monster. She turned and ran. She ran through the ballroom, past the shocked guests, down the stone steps of the museum, and into the cold New York night. The next morning, New York woke up to a scandal. Billionaire's mole, the Blackwood heiress. Hiding in plain sight, the headlines were vicious. They painted Cassidy as a femme fatale, a spy sent by her criminal father to seduce and destroy Silas Sterling. At Sterling Dynamics, the situation was apocalyptic. The stock had dropped 18% in pre-market trading. Vendors were cancelling contracts. The board called an emergency meeting to vote on removing Silas as CEO. Silas sat in his office, staring at the window. He hadn't slept. He was drinking the Macallan 52, but he couldn't taste it. He felt numb. He kept replaying the last 2 weeks, the banter, the late nights, the way she had looked at him. Was it all a lie? Was she just that good of an actress? His intercom buzzed. It was Preston Vane. "The vote is in an hour, Silas." Preston's voice was gleeful. "You're done. You brought a viper into our nest. The board has lost confidence." Silas didn't answer. He didn't care. Without Cassidy, or rather the idea of Cassidy, the fight had gone out of him. Meanwhile, in a small, dingy motel room in Queens, Cassidy was packing her bag. She had nowhere to go. Her father had frozen her hidden bank accounts, a final power move to force her back to him. She had $40 and a Metro card. She turned on the TV. The news was showing a live feed of Sterling Dynamics. "Rumors are swirling that Preston Vane will take over as interim CEO," the reporter said. "Vane has announced he will likely accept Harrison Blackwood's offer to buy the company's assets to stabilize the stock." Cassidy froze. Vane and Blackwood. It hit her like a lightning bolt. She grabbed her notebook, the one she had used to scribble notes during the board meeting. She frantically flipped through the pages. "The seaport," she whispered, "the Vietnam trade deal." She remembered something Preston Vane had said in the hallway, something she hadn't thought much of at the time. He had been on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "The acquisition is ready on the Hong Kong side." Her father, Harrison Blackwood, didn't operate out of the US anymore. He operated out of Hong Kong. It wasn't a hostile takeover from the outside. It was an inside job. Preston Vane wasn't just a rival. He was working for her father. They had orchestrated this entire thing. Her father had likely tipped Vane off about her identity days ago, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate the bomb at the gala. If Vane took over, he would sell the company to Blackwood for scraps. They would dismantle Silas's legacy piece by piece. Cassidy looked at her reflection in the cracked motel mirror. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She was fired, she was hated, she was disgraced, but she was a Blackwood, and Blackwoods didn't lose. "He thinks I'm a spy," she said to the empty room, wiping her tears. "Fine. I'll show him what a spy can really do." She reached into her bag. She still had it. The black key card. Silas had fired her, but in the chaos, security hadn't deactivated her pass yet. She knew the system. It took 24 hours for HR to purge a clearance level as high as hers. She had 1 hour before the board meeting, 1 hour to break into the most secure building in New York, steal the proof of the Vane Blackwood conspiracy, and clear her name. She put on her waitress uniform from the Obsidian, the only clean clothes she had left. It was fitting. She would finish this the way she started it. Cassidy Miller walked out of the motel. She wasn't running away anymore. She was going to war. At Sterling Dynamics, the lobby was swarming with reporters. Cassidy slipped in through the loading dock using her key card. The light blinked green. Thank God. She navigated the service elevators, heart pounding. She reached the 50th floor. The hallway was empty. Everyone was in the main conference room for the vote. She sprinted to Preston Vane's office. It was locked. She looked around. A fire extinguisher hung on the wall. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed it and smashed the handle of the glass door. It didn't shatter, it was reinforced, but the lock mechanism jarred loose. She shoved the door open and ran to his computer. Password protected. Think like Vane, she muttered. Arrogant, greedy. She tried money. No. She tried sterling. No. She looked at the photo on his desk. It was him shaking hands with a younger Harrison Blackwood on a yacht. The yacht's name was the Vulture. She typed in Vulture. Access granted. She frantically searched his emails. There it was. A folder marked Project Phoenix. She opened it. Emails between Vane and Harrison Blackwood dating back 6 months. They detailed the plan to sabotage the Helios project, frame Silas for incompetence, and then execute the buyout. And there was one email from yesterday. The girl is the trigger. As soon as you expose her at the gala, I will move the motion to dismiss Silas. Make sure she takes the fall. They had used her. Her father had used his own daughter as a pawn to destroy his enemy. Cassidy printed the emails. She grabbed the stack of papers. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Security. Hey, you there, stop. Cassidy didn't stop. She ran toward the boardroom. Inside the boardroom, Preston Vane was standing. All in favor of removing Silas Sterling as CEO? 10 hands went up. It was a majority. Silas sat there, defeated. He closed his eyes. Fine, take it. Bam! The doors to the boardroom flew open. Cassidy Miller stood there, breathless, her waitress uniform stained with grease from the service elevator, holding a fistful of papers. Cassidy. Silas stood up, anger flaring. I told you. Shut up, Silas, she yelled. She threw the papers onto the table. They scattered like confetti. Read them, she screamed at the board members. Read them before you vote. Preston Vane turned pale. Security, get her out. If you touch me, Cassidy snarled at the guard reaching for her, I will upload these documents to the server of the FBI. I have a copy on a timer. She didn't, but she sold the lie perfectly. One of the board members, an elderly woman named Martha, picked up a paper. Her eyes widened. Preston, Martha said, her voice trembling. What is this? This is an email from Harrison Blackwood, discussing a payout to your offshore account. The room erupted. Silas grabbed a sheet. He read it. His face transformed from defeat to shock, and then to a cold, terrifying rage. He looked at Preston Vane. You were working with Blackwood, Silas said, his voice deadly calm. You betrayed the family. It's a forgery, Preston squealed. She's a liar. She's a Blackwood. I am a Blackwood, Cassidy said, stepping forward. She looked like a warrior. I am the daughter of the man who taught you how to steal, which means I know a thief when I see one. She looked at Silas. I didn't know, Silas, I swear. I came here to warn you, not to hurt you. My father hates me as much as he hates you because I wouldn't play his game. Well, I'm playing it now, and I'm playing to win. Silas looked at the papers, then at Cassidy. He saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the fire. He turned to the board. Motion to dismiss Preston Vane for corporate treason and immediate removal from the premises. Seconded, Martha shouted. All in favor? Every hand went up. Silas looked at Preston. Get out. The police are waiting downstairs. Preston Vane was dragged out, kicking and screaming. The room was buzzing with shock, but Silas only had eyes for Cassidy. They were standing across the table from each other. The wreckage of the battle lay between them. You saved the company, Silas said quietly. I paid my debt, Cassidy said. Her voice broke. I'm sorry about the gala. I'm sorry I didn't tell you who I was. I was afraid you'd look at me the way you did last night. Silas walked around the table. He stopped in front of her. He reached out and touched her face. I was a fool, Silas said. I looked at the name, not the person. You aren't your father, Cassidy. You are the woman who snatched a scotch from my hand and saved my life. Twice. Cassidy leaned into his touch, the tears finally falling. So, she sniffled, am I still fired? Silas smiled. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her neck, holding her tight in front of the entire board of directors. No, he whispered. I'm promoting you. To co-CEO. The boardroom was finally quiet. The security guards had dragged a screaming Preston Vane out, and the board members had retreated in shock. Silas and Cassidy were left alone in the wreckage of the battle. Cassidy slumped into a leather chair, her hands still shaking. She was wearing a grease-stained waitress uniform in a room worth millions. But she didn't feel like hiding anymore. "You realize," Silas said, loosening his tie, "that you just declared war. Harrison doesn't forgive public humiliation. He holds a massive amount of sterling debt through shell companies. If he calls in those loans today, we don't have the cash to pay him. He can still bankrupt us." Cassidy walked to the window, looking out at the city. "I know. He thinks he has me cornered." She turned back to Silas, her eyes hardening. "But there is another way. When I ran away at 18, my grandmother left me a trust fund in Zurich. I swore I'd never touch a cent of that blood money. I'd rather scrub floors than use it." Silas watched her intensely. "And now?" "Now," Cassidy said, "I realize money is just a weapon. And I'm going to use his own family's money to buy the debt he holds over you. It's the only checkmate he can't stop." "Cassidy," Silas said, taking her hands, "that money is your freedom. You could walk away." "I don't want to run anymore, Silas. I want to build something. With you." An hour later, a video conference connected them to Hong Kong. Harrison Blackwood's face appeared on the massive screen, purple with rage. "You insolent brat," Harrison spat. "I am calling in the Vane loans. I want repayment in full by $5 p.m., or I file for foreclosure on Sterling Dynamics." Cassidy sat next to Silas, wearing one of his crisp white shirts, looking utterly terrifying. "Hello, father. Don't you speak to me. I will bury you." "Actually, Harrison, about those loans," Silas interrupted smoothly. "They've been purchased by a private investor." Harrison blinked. "Impossible. No bank would touch you." "Not a bank," Cassidy corrected. "The Matilda Blackwood Family Trust." The color drained from Harrison's face. "You hated that money." "I did, but I used it to buy the debt. Which means Sterling Dynamics now owes money to me. And I've decided to forgive the interest." She leaned into the camera. "You have no leverage, father. Preston Vane is in jail. Your spy is gone. And if you ever come near us again, I will release Vane's remaining emails to the international authorities. I know about the bribery in Jakarta." Harrison slammed his hand on his desk, defeated by the daughter he tried to destroy. "You are no daughter of mine." "Thank God for that," Cassidy replied, and cut the feed. Silas let out a long breath in the silence that followed. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "Too late," Cassidy smirked. "You're stuck with me." 3 months later, the Obsidian was buzzing for its grand reopening under Sterling Blackwood Enterprises. The Waitress heiress scandal had turned into a business legend, and the company's stock had tripled. Silas stood at the bar, watching Cassidy charm the mayor of New York. She wore a stunning emerald gown, radiating a power that combined her blue blood roots with the grit she'd learned waiting tables. When she joined him, Silas handed her a glass of water. Room temperature, no ice. "I have a business proposition," Silas said, the music fading around them. "I thought we were already 50-50 partners," she teased. "This is a merger." Silas dropped to one knee. The room gasped and went silent. He opened a velvet box, revealing a ring with a diamond like raw ice, flanked by shards of black obsidian. "Cassidy Victoria Blackwood," Silas announced to the room. "You served me humble pie, saved my legacy, and stole my heart. I don't want to live another day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears pricked Cassidy's eyes. She looked at the staff beaming by the kitchen, then down at the man who saw her when she was invisible. "Well," she laughed through her tears, "someone has to make sure you don't drink the dishwater." Silas laughed, relieved. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the room erupted in applause. As they pulled apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "What's our next move, co-CEO?" Cassidy smiled at the ring, then at him. "Simple. We order dinner, and this time we let someone else serve us." And that is the incredible story of Cassidy Miller and Silas Sterling. From a humiliated waitress to a billionaire powerhouse, Cassidy proved that true worth isn't found in a bank account, but in character, intelligence, and the courage to stand up to giants. She showed us that sometimes the person pouring your water might just be the only person capable of saving your life. What did you think of Cassidy's revenge on her father? Would you have forgiven Silas for doubting her at the gala? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of romance, betrayal, and sweet justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new dramas every single week. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.